Hi, everyone. My name is Dream Hampton, and I'm one of the executive producers of Finding Justice. Thank you. And this is Rashad, the president of Color of Change. So thank you for taking time on what was definitely a beach day to come and sit and watch this piece. This was a part of a 6-part docu series that aired on BET called Finding Justice. We made it with Dwayne Johnson and his company, $7 Entertainment, and Leaps and Bounds, David Leapson and his team. And as we were conceiving this show, from the very beginning, we began working with Color of Change, with Rashad Robinson, with Rashid Shabazz, and we wanted to be partnered with people who are on the ground and in the field working on these issues. I can just quickly tell you the other shows. We did a show about Stand Your Ground, set in Florida. We did a show about police violence, set in Minneapolis. We did a show about the bail bond industry, set in St. Louis. And we did a show about lead in the water in Baltimore. And each of those shows, we wanted to not only show the injustice, but show people on the ground, self-organizing, local folks, national organizations like Color of Change, fighting that injustice. So that was one of those episodes. Thank you. So Rashad, it is when we leave the Vineyard, it's going to be 2020. Basically, the election starts on Monday. And I know some of you have already felt like we're already in 2020 mode. If you have been either watching or avoiding the elections with 55 people up on stage. But we know how urgent this moment feels and is. And can you describe what's happening in the field right now as it relates to voter suppression and the kinds of work that's being done to fight what happened when Stacey Abrams was robbed of being governor in Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's really appropriate that you sort of name the whole series Finding Justice, because in many ways, right, our fight, our work to find justice is constantly kind of about the rules, right? About how do we leverage the rules of the road. And when you think about voting, we're oftentimes thinking about, you know, what are the rules of voting? How is it fair or not? And I think what happened in 2016, and what the new normal in many ways is that no one is going to magically come and save us. You know, the right wing has kind of called our bluff on so many different things, and kind of called the bluff on these ideas that there is a line that will or won't be crossed, right? We thought that there were certain things that you couldn't say out in the public space that were racist, and we thought there were things that were sort of off the map, and they've sort of called the bluff. You thought that, wow, at a certain point that someone couldn't get confirmed that they had certain things in their background, and that bluff has been called. We thought that in order to be, we may have disagreed with the politics of previous education or housing and urban development secretaries, but we knew they knew something about housing and urban development, even if we may have disagreed with their opinions on it. We knew they actually maybe have studied something about it. And so the bluff has been called in so many different ways, right? And so then the question is, what are we building structurally and politically to acknowledge that there's a new kind of set of rules, that we just aren't yelling and expecting that the Justice Department will step in when voter suppression happens, or that that the courts will save us. And so the question really is that we have to run up the score. We have to run up the score the ways in which, you know, years ago, when black colleges played, white colleges, you knew the referees weren't going to be fair, and you couldn't just go in and think that you were going to sort of win in the, final seconds of the last quarter. We actually had to run the score up. It's the thing that, elders tell us, that you just can't be as good, but you have to work 10 times harder. And that is actually going to be what happens this upcoming election, because the honest truth and the honest fact is we can't win progress if we don't vote, but our opponents know that they can't win if we do.
Say that again, Rashad.
We can't win progress if we don't vote, but they know that they can't win progress, or they can't keep the status quo in place if we do vote. And so but that's a deep thing, that they can't win without suppressing our vote. Such are the demographics in this country. Yeah. And this doesn't just mean black and brown. This means also progressive white folks. Such are the demographics in this country that we know that Trump lost the popular vote by almost 3 million, right? Maybe more than 3 million. Mm-hmm. So they can't win without suppressing our vote. Can you talk a little bit about, did I cut you off? Were you about to make another point? No, keep going.
So unpack a bit about the history. You did it in the project. What's the seminal Supreme Court case that undid so much of the work of the civil rights movement? And explain in your quickest kind of definition of gerrymandering and redistricting.
So the Shelby v. Holder case, which was a case that undid something called Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And Section 5 was this piece that basically said that certain jurisdictions around the country that had a history of suppressing the vote, in order for them to change their voting rules, in order for them to move one polling place from one side of town to another, because we knew that they had a history of moving one polling place to the other side of town, because it wasn't just a simple move that had sort of a underlying value about what they were trying to get out of it. They had to clear it through the Department of Justice. And by clearing it through the Department of Justice, it just prevented them from doing a bunch of things. And over time, it also stopped a lot of things. The thing is a lot of what ends up happening with the rest of the Voting Rights Act is we may end up having our side sue and get results, but the election already happened, right? And so like they say, yes, they suppressed, but then the person is in office already designing new sets of laws. So maybe the next time around, their suppression is legal. And so the fact of the matter is that undoing that by saying that these jurisdictions in places around the country, are no longer racist anymore, basically. And they no longer have to clear their things in places like Mississippi and Alabama, South Carolina and North Carolina, and places in the North. And so, I think sometimes we think of all of this sort of voter suppression as a product of the South, but, the histories of segregation and busing and all these issues in the North also led a lot of places in the North to have to pre-clear their changes. And so that was the start of the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act. But politically, I think the question for all of us is a lot of the work for decades had been about protecting the Voting Rights Act. And I think that is fine, but simply trying to protect something that was the best we could win in the 60s is actually shouldn't be our strategy. And so thinking about what happens when we win victories and we know that it was the best we could win politically, and we don't think about just defending it, but we think about advancing it. And so our vision for the future can't be just about restoring the Voting Rights Act, which was imperfect, but about what is the 21st century vision for voting and democracy in this country, where we have universal registration, where we have the ability to vote by mail or vote through technology and vote over periods of time. What are the things that we maybe have put on an agenda around voting that are no longer actually get us what we want? I hear a lot of people talk about make election day a holiday. But, on holidays, I go out to eat and I see a lot of people working in restaurants. That doesn't mean they're going to actually get to vote if election day becomes a holiday. Election day becomes a holiday. A lot of people in this room will probably take 3-day weekends and spend time at a lot of places. I'm not saying you won't vote, but I'm saying that that doesn't mean that it actually deals with the modern economy and the ways in which work has changed as well. And so I think we have to think about all of the tools we're putting in place to ensure that we get as many people being able to express their will for a better future through the vote. But, you know, voting alone or just telling people to go and vote without thinking about all of the sort of structures about how our voting is set up doesn't actually get us to the type of political power that changes the sort of rules. And so you brought up gerrymandering and redistricting, and I'd like to put the census on the agenda, which the 2020 census will be going out into our communities very soon. The Trump administration has done everything possible to ensure that people don't fill out this census. Back in 2010, there was a 2 million undercount of Black children. Of 2 million undercount of children, about 60% of that were children of color, which meant that in communities around the country, programs like Head Start and other things. And in 2010, the Obama administration did everything possible to increase the budget, to get enumerators of color into communities, to do everything possible to make sure people filled out the census. And why is the census connected to voting? Because the numbers on the census determine how the map is cut for representation. And it determines what type of representation we get in communities, and that determines what type of funding. And we're already at a disadvantage because in community, because of the history of mass incarceration, you know, which was examined in this system, in this film, in this series. One of the things around the way that mass incarceration sort of impacts the census and our counting and how all these things work together is, quite frankly, people who are currently incarcerated get counted in the districts and the communities where they are housed. So like, let's take New York, for example. Most prisoners come from about 7 downstate counties, but they're counted upstate, which means money for roads and schools and all of that go upstate. And this is not right. New York is just one example. You can look at Philly and, you know, and in the like outskirts and rural areas of Pennsylvania, right? So not only do prisons become economic drivers for poor white communities, but they also become their way to enhance their voting power. So this idea of one person, one vote means that we are actually diluted, our voting power is diluted. And so when I talk about the rules of voting, I talk about, yes, we need to turn out in numbers to vote. But once we gain power, we have to think about and work on expanding our ability to get as many people out to vote. And I will be perfectly honest, we haven't always been good at that, because oftentimes we've elected leaders that have got elected under certain conditions and have been oftentimes unwilling to change those conditions.
Rashad, obviously that the night that Stacey had the election stolen from her, we were watching something happen in Florida as well. And I met you 15 years ago. You just were talking about folks that are incarcerated. And when I met you 15 years ago, you were working on restoring people who had felonies, restoring their right to vote. And so Rashad has been doing this for a very long time. And what we saw happen, we did have that one victory in Florida. People know about that victory that was on the ballot in Florida, where they voted, the state of Florida, the voters of Florida voted so that to have felons' rights to vote restored. And then there was some kind of what she called about the bureaucratic, the mundane way that these things happen, where the opposition, the GOP, the governor who won, ended up undoing the work that the voters had just done. And I bring this up because it takes a lot, you know, to get out to vote. We just saw what it takes in so many of our communities. And all of these communities weren't poor, by the way. Everyone in this room, unlike Trump, knows that Atlanta is very diverse economically, including in Black neighborhoods. But even in middle-class Black neighborhoods, people were waiting 3-4 hours to vote. And there's so many barriers to like participate in this system. And then when we have results that can so easily be undone, then I think that it discourages people in general. So can you talk about what happened in Florida?
I want to say that it's not been totally undone. People are getting their rights restored, and the campaign, the Florida Rights Restoration campaign, led by Desmond Meade, is doing a lot of work, and a lot of people are going to have their rights restored because of what Amendment 4 and the passage of it. And so, of course, some roadblocks are being put in the way or attempting to be put in the way, but there is a real campaign that will undo a lot of those roadblocks as well.
Yep.
This is just not a game. This past election cycle in 2018, we were, doing a lot of rapid response around all sorts of things that were just dirty tricks. And if you're like fighting all your time on dirty tricks, you can't actually even sometimes get ahead to like advance your own thing. I mean, we had places around the country, small towns, that were moving their polling places from the town hall to a jail, or the town hall to the police department, in Black neighborhoods, right? So show up to this police department if you want to, and try to vote if you want to, right? And so this kind of like vision of poll taxes and all of that being like the days of old, we had these sort of, and like those things can seem almost benign. The city council's like, oh, we're going under renovation with the town hall. What other place can we put the polling place this time around? Let's put it at the police department, and have, and tell people to show up to the police department to vote. And so, we were rapidly responding, and in a lot of those places, we were able to beat it back, right? But each time we were working to beat it back, there was something else popping up. And that game Whack-A-Mole at the carnival, where something pops up and you hit it down, and something else pops up and you hit it down, and you don't know what winning actually looks like in the end. Does it look like that I've like beaten all the moles down or not, right? And how do I like not have moles popping up anymore? It's like, how is the place I want to get to, and is the place that we have to build more power to get to. And that, I think, requires us to be more passionate about fighting for voting rights, the same way we are passionate and we turn out around police accountability, the same way we turn out around some other issues that sort of animate our outrage and our energy, some of the anti-Trump stuff, right? This has to be that. For too long, I think that since the Voting Rights Act, and particularly in the last 20 years, so much of our advocacy around voting rights, except with Reverend Barber in North Carolina, a lot of the work has been in the courts. And we've relied on lawyers to like argue legal decisions, but the courts are being packed in ways that are going to make it really hard. And so I say all this not to get us down about the 2020 election, but to recognize that it is not a done deal. That it is not simply that people will hate Trump and turn out, and we will like move forward in a way that we want to. That folks are playing for keeps. And we're going to have to do everything we can to inspire numbers that we've never seen before to turn out and to vote, and to do so in the face of deep attempts to stop us.
Thank you, Rashad. Thank you. Yes. I think we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. Sure. I don't know if there's another microphone or you. Yep. Yeah.
Hello. I have a question about how we react to the issues, meaning, is there an effort to be more offensive and less defensive not less defensive, you have to be defensive, but it seems like a lot of the things that we're doing are response to how we're being held back. Is there anything that we're doing offensive, like a proactive? That's a good word, proactive. Well, I'm sorry, offensive, proactive. Meaning like, since we know that there's a power cable problem, can we make it a requirement for one of the volunteers at each location to be an electrical engineer, and they can have a bunch of power cables, and if the things look different, they can use a soldering iron to change it. You know what I mean? Is there a way that we can think ahead of what has always been happening to us, instead of reacting, not instead of, but in addition to reacting afterwards?
So yes, I mean, that is what is happening in a lot of places. I think the thing I'll say is that I want to think about our proactive as a step further than that, because the sort of the issues around the machines, the long lines, all of those things are symptoms of a much bigger sort of issue around power, right? Because those problems won't be solved if we don't get the right people in the Secretary of State role. Because there's nothing we could actually do in many of these places, is to deal with the machine issue if we have the wrong level. If we don't actually have people out in the streets passionate about voting and about holding elected officials, regardless of what political party they're in, accountable, then those in power are not going to be nervous about disappointing Black people. They're going to feel like that after Election Day is over, that people will go back to doing what they were doing before and be perfectly fine. And so these sort of dirty tricks are worth it. I think that there are folks on the other side that would find it worth it to serve short jail sentences if they could keep power in place. And so knowing that, right, means that is the type of power that we have to think about overcoming and beating. And so I don't disagree with you on it, but that means that when we do gain power and when we have power, and that means that we have to turn out to get it, we've got to then do things like, universal registration. We have to do things like changing so that we're not having to show up on one day with a set of machines, and we are like literally changing the rules, because that's what power is. Power is the ability to change the rules, and that's what I think we have to focus on. But I do 100% agree with being proactive, and I think the Florida rights restoration work is about being proactive. The work around early voting and universal registration is proactive. All of that stuff is proactive. And that vision for 21st century voting has to be part of the work, while we are also playing defense so we can simply win in some of these places.
Yeah, sorry. Howdy. Thank you for actually bringing up the census issue. I attended the Rigged film earlier this week, and packing and cracking of gerrymandering was mentioned, but not the census issue. In regards to the census issue, how can we address that? How can we fix that? I haven't actually heard of any organizations or movements that are addressing that.
So if you go to ourcount.org, which is the Color of Change platform that we've developed specifically around the census, ourcount.org. I hope I'm getting it right. That's right? Okay, thanks, Tamika. Ourcount.org. And the platform is our ability to get out the count. What we're going to be doing is a lot of what we call relational organizing and building networks and teams of people around the country to reach out in hard to count places, showing up in laundromats and doing counting, building community events and forums around the voting, around the issue of the census. This will be a digital first census for the first time. And so also dealing with all the ways in which the digital divide really does still impact many folks who are considered hard to count. Then we'll be digging into key places around the country. We did some early focus groups with Black folks in urban areas, rural areas, and Black immigrants to really sort of get a sense for the type of messaging we wanted to develop to reach people around the census. And so we'll be also building a real ad and media campaign that will be both sort of leveraging a lot of digital, a lot of digital innovation with cross-tabbing consumer marketing data to reach people. So like, finding, Black folks who buy certain sneakers or natural hair care products or whatever, and then building teams of people that can be Census ambassadors with a deep recognition that peer-to-peer engagement is going to be critically important to getting the right numbers. But yeah, I mean, there is an attempt to ensure that we are not counted. And for anyone that's done any work, even just trying to find who you are, right, as a Black person, and like, paying money on one of those sites that maybe some of them we shouldn't use, that like tracks, the first places you'll start finding your people are on these census tracks, right? The census is literally about being counted, about saying that you exist and being heard. And to the extent that the attempts to erase people's existence is not simply sort of an accidental one. It is a political project about making it so that we have less power and less ability to leverage that power and to use that power to connect with other communities who are gaining power. We've got to be in a position to undo that. And so there's going to be really deep functional barriers, everything from white enumerators coming into our communities because there's not going to be as much attempts around diversity. There's going to be political barriers, and that people are going to feel a way about signing the census because they are watching a president on TV saying the things that he's saying, and they're also going to watch him tweet throughout the census process about all sorts of things. And then there's like going to be problems that are going to be uncomfortable with the form about, what the boxes that you might have to check. And all of that is part of the process, but all of that is why we need you, because we can't overcome that without really building powerful voice of us talking to us about why we need to do this. And so the census, just like voting, is something we do in private, right? We kind of go behind a curtain, or we get the form, we do it in private. So we have to make the me about the us if we're going to actually unlock the power that this tool has to ensure that we are able to make sure the sum of our individual parts is more whole.
I'm sure y'all can see why when I set out to make this project, Rashad was one of the first people I called. Thank you so much again. Yes, for sure. If you want to watch this series, again, this is one episode of 6. You can go to BET.com. The series is called Finding Justice. I'm a proud board member of Color of Change, and Rashad is going to tell you how to support Color of Change in the future and moving forward.
So there's a really easy way to join us. If you just take out your phones, right? I know like sometimes folks are like, this thing happened. What do I do about it? At Color of Change, we try to give you something strategic to do. And so, I want to make it easy. So you take out your phone, you can text the word color, just the word color, to the number. So in the number space, you're going to put 225568. That's the word color to 225568. So I'll say it one more time. Color to 225568 and send. You'll get a response right back if it worked. You put your zip code in, and it's your way of engaging. And what we'll be able to do is serve you up with campaigns that are happening right in your community, the ability to engage, the ability to connect other people to the efforts. At Color of Change, we believe that people don't experience issues, they experience life, that the forces that hold us back are interrelated. So we work on everything from voter suppression to criminal justice to issues around media accountability and the economy, because our work is about translating the presence that Black people have in the world into the power to change the rules. And so we can't do it without people. We can't build power for justice without people raising their voices. And so the best way to do that is to join us. And so that's a clear way, and ask your friends and your family to join us. We are a movement of 1.7 million Black folks and allies of every race, and our work is to build power. And so I just also want to thank Dream for not just this series of the work of putting it together, but how it was put together. And there's all sorts of ways that documentaries and films can be put together to look at issues, but don't do anything beyond giving us analysis. Moving people from analysis to action is the hardest thing. And we just can't have conversations about what's happening in the world. We have to have action. And action is going to be key. And what she did in this piece is the work to move people from analysis to action. And that's how we build power, and that's how we make society whole.